Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. We are here for our first Mailbag podcast of the regular season, one day before Wisconsin takes on Western Kentucky at Camp Randall Stadium. We're doing, like I mentioned, we're doing a Mailbag podcast this week like we will every Friday typically with Saturday games. With the Friday game, we're doing this one on Thursday. And don't forget that after games on Fridays or Saturdays, I'll also have a live chat on Twitter that you can join if you don't get your question in time for this podcast, or after the game on Saturday you have a question you want to get answered right away. Just look out for my live chat on Twitter, and I'm going to hop on whenever I get my work done after the game, and I can take your questions there too. So thanks for everyone who sent in questions. We're going to go ahead and get right into this. The first one is from the Odds Breakers at the Odds Breakers. He asks, how does Rafael Gaglianone look? That's a good question because we actually haven't seen him since he came back from injury. They closed camp on, I think our last open practice was the Saturday before last. So the last week of fall camp, and then this week during game week, we haven't been able to see practice. So at some point last week, he came back from injury, and based on what he said on Wednesday, or I guess it was on Tuesday to us, he's 100%, and it was more of a little bit more of a precautionary thing that he was being held out. He just had some tightness in his right leg. They didn't want it to turn into another situation like 2016 where his back flares up because if he tried to kick through this tightness, I think they were afraid that maybe it would kind of spread to his back, but I think after just getting some rest for a couple of weeks, I think he's good to go. He seems to not be very worried about it. They're going to be careful about how much he practices and how much his usage, I guess, throughout the week. But as of right, you always kind of worry about back issues cropping back up. But as of right now, from everything we've been told and everything Gaglianone has told us this week, that he's 100% ready to go. And there's really no issues right now with him kicking. So while we haven't seen him since he came back, I think everything is looking good for him for week one. Let's see, the next one's from Mark Wolfgram at Mark W. Wolfgram. He asks, any sense from the coaching staff as to how they'll take advantage of the new Redshirt Rule? We haven't really got a straight answer on that, Mark. I think we've tried to kind of, pick with some questions about that in the past, and it's kind of still, they haven't really revealed exactly what their plan will be there, whether they might play a couple guys in these first couple games and then decide or not whether they want to redshirt them and keep them at that 4-game limit, or if I think maybe the more likely scenario might be that some freshmen who are not ready to play in these first few games, eventually in October or November, kind of take a leap over the next couple months, and they realize a couple more of these guys can help them, or maybe there's some more injuries that kind of force these guys into some action. So I think those guys might apply to those guys more here. I think guys that maybe aren't quite ready to play yet, but by November they feel like they can help the team. Then you can stick them in there for up to 4 games late in the season, and they can give you something and still redshirt. I think that's probably the most likely outcome for this helping guys. I think last season Scott Nelson maybe would have been that guy that I think he got injured during fall camp, missed the first few weeks, and I think by November, especially when Dakota Dixon was dealing with a lot of injuries, they would have liked to use Scott Nelson a few of those games, and they couldn't do that without burning his red shirt. So I think that's probably the most likely thing we'll see here. Now it'll be interesting to see exactly how many guys they play, because I think I mentioned on Zach Heilprin's podcast a couple weeks ago that, they could play 5 true freshmen in the bowl game that haven't played and just play them on special teams just to get them a little bit of game experience, just to get their feet wet and get them in a game and see how it looks before they head into their first full season. So, I really don't know exactly how this is going to work, but it at least gives you a lot more flexibility as a coaching staff when you deal with injuries and you need an extra guy later in the season to be able to just plug one of these true freshmen in that you think is talented but maybe wasn't ready at the start of the season. So it's I think it's going to be really advantageous for a lot of guys and a lot of programs that run into those situations. Exactly how which guys are going to play and if any of those potential redshirt guys are going to play in the first couple games rather than later. We just don't really know that yet. It's going to be something to really keep an eye on, and we're going to have to look at the participation report, every game and kind of keep a tally on these freshmen. So it's going to be a really interesting ride here to see when these freshmen play and how many play. Next one's from Kyle Gasser at Gasman3268. He asks, which of the 3 non-conference games, Western Kentucky, New Mexico, or BYU, do you think will be the most challenging for the Badgers? I think it's going to be BYU. I think in this first game against Western Kentucky, there could be some challenges for Wisconsin's cornerbacks and some of their young guys in the secondary because this is such a pass-heavy offense and an up-tempo offense. So it'd be interesting to see how organized this young defense is when Western Kentucky is going up-tempo. And this is a team that attempted the 3rd most passes in FBS last year, so they're going to air the ball out. It'll be interesting to see how these young cornerbacks and these inexperienced guys in the secondary kind of handle that. But I think overall BYU is going to be the most challenging. I think it was sort of just a nightmare season for them last year. No one expected them to be that bad, and I don't think they're going to be that bad again. Now, I don't think BYU is going to come back with a really good season. I don't think they're going to come back with an 8-4, 9-3 season or anything like that, but I think they should be improved from last season. And I don't think it's going to be quite the cakewalk it was at BYU last season. So Wisconsin should be able to take care of these 3 games pretty easily. But if I had to pick one of those that I think maybe was a little bit more difficult, I'd say maybe BYU. Okay, the next one is from Solomon Grundy at Solomon Grundy 2. He asks, what young receivers are dark horses to step up after the suspensions? Yeah, well, I think the two obvious ones are AJ Taylor and Kendrick Pryor, who are going to be your starters. But I'm guessing you're asking more about the guys after them. It was kind of interesting on Sunday. The depth chart came out, and Jack Dunn and Adam Krumholtz, 2 local walk-ons that are sophomores, were the second-team receivers. And I think they're going to get the first crack here behind Taylor and Pryor, simply because they've been in the offense longer and they know what to do, and they're not. I think Wisconsin thinks they're not going to make as many mental mistakes out there as some of their talented true freshmen like Aaron Cruikshank or Taj Mustafa. So I think Krumholtz and Dunn will get the first crack at reps, and I think that right now the coaching staff maybe trusts them a little bit more. I think Cruikshank, as impressive as his offseason has been, I think that he's still kind of learning the playbook. I think Ted Gilmore has talked about in the past that they're going to use him in certain packages, but maybe he hasn't quite grasped the entire playbook yet. So I think that maybe Cruikshank's a guy that as the season progresses, he sees a little bit more time as he becomes more familiar with the offense. That may be a little more difficult once Danny Davis comes back in week 3, but I think there's going to be reps for him later in the season. And in these first couple games too, even if Krumholtz and Dunn kind of get the first crack at it, I think Cruikshank will play as well. I think he's, like Ted Gilmore said, he's going to be in certain packages and they're going to use him here and there. If nothing else, he'll at least be in there some in certain situations. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think those 3 guys, Dunn, Krumholtz, and Cruikshank are the 3 that are definitely going to play behind Taylor and Cephas in this first game. It's going to be interesting to see if Mustafa gets in there at all. He was another early enrollee along with Cruikshank, and he's been really impressive throughout the offseason as well. I think if it weren't for Cruikshank, Mustafa might be getting a lot more pub this offseason because he's been really impressive since the spring. And obviously it seems like he's a little bit behind Cruikshank right now, but I think at some point he might be able to give them something this year. It's going to be interesting to see if they still want to redshirt him, though. I think maybe that's the most likely thing, is that Mustafa ends up staying under that 4-game limit this season and still redshirting. But if they need him, if they get if they feel like he's too talented to keep off the field, or if they suffer a couple more injuries, or maybe Davis misses more time than we expect, then I think that Mustafa's a guy they can turn to and feel pretty good about, at least from a talent standpoint, that he can go out there and make some plays. So, as of right now, those are the four guys after Pryor and Taylor that I think could see time. I think Krumholtz and Dunn are going to get the first crack at it, but I think those two true freshmen have showed this offseason that they're really talented, and we might see them at some point on Friday night. Let's see, Sean Lingsweiler at Lanzarus21, he asks, will Christ ever allow an alternate uniform? That's an interesting one. I'm sure that at some point Wisconsin might bring out a cool uniform. I don't think Wisconsin necessarily wants to change their look all that much. They really like the traditional look, and they don't really want to. I guess that's sort of part of their brand too. Is just that they're, they're kind of consistent the whole time. They have these jerseys that I think Alabama's kind of the same too. They never really want to change their jerseys too much. There's just certain programs that like the tradition of their regular jerseys. So, I think at some point there might be a different type of uniform out there for Wisconsin. I don't think if there is one, I don't think it'll be a drastic change. You're definitely not going to see the Maryland or Oregon type of crazy uniforms out there. I don't think Wisconsin is really going to, want that to happen or allow that to happen. But who knows? I think at some point maybe they'll throw a different uniform that we're not used to out there. That would be pretty interesting. So, but as of right now, it looks like it's going to be pretty traditional. Let's see. Johnny Walsh at Johnny Walsh asks, who is the funniest player or coach on the team? This was a hard one for me to kind of work through. I think it's probably Chris Orr. He's definitely one of the funniest. It's always great to talk to Chris Orr. He's a guy that kind of always makes you laugh and is always smiling. So I think he's one of those. But I think sort of an underrated one might be Bo Benshaw. He's not always, funny every time you talk to him, but I think, occasionally he'll say something that's pretty great. So, those are the couple guys that maybe I thought about. There's some other guys too. There's a lot of funny guys on this team, but I think Chris Orr would probably be the one I go to as my number one. Okay, we're going to end with a few questions from Brian Kyle here, or Brian Call. I'm not really sure how you say it. His first one is, what's up with Bradrick Shaw? Now, Bradrick Shaw tore his ACL against Minnesota last year, and he is still recovering from that. Xander Neville was able to kind of recover a little bit more quickly. He suffered the same injury in the same game, and he was back for fall camp. Now Neville is, he suffered another injury and is out right now and is going to miss week one with another right leg injury. But I think when fall camp started, before he suffered that, he was getting close to 100% back from that ACL. Now with Shaw, it's just been a little bit more slower moving. I think earlier in fall camp, John Settle told me that they're targeting the start of Big Ten play for Shaw's return, which would be at Iowa in week 4. Now we'll see if he's able to meet that, or if he's if he's at 100% by that point, or if he's at least able to give them something. It's going to be I'm curious to see what Tywan Deal does these first few games, because I think if Tywan Deal performs well as sort of the number 2 early down work guy, and Chris James and Garrett Groshek are still giving you a lot in the passing game, then I think as long as Jonathan Taylor stays healthy and Tywan Deal is performing well, it's going to be hard for Shaw to break into this rotation. Shaw was their second leading rusher last year, but I don't think he did anything that I guess wowed the coaching staff enough to where he's going to be able to just step right in as Taylor's backup again if Tywan Deal is playing well. Deal's a guy that's really motivated coming into his final year after missing all of last season and a good chunk of the season before that due to injury, and he's healthy right now, and if he can stay that way, I think that he could have a pretty good season. So it's a sort of a wait and see on Shaw. We'll see if he's healthy by the time Big Ten play starts here. And if he is healthy, we'll see if he can beat out Deal or some of these other guys for playing time. I'm not, I think right now it's really up in the air for Shaw whether he's able to contribute much this year at all. So it's going to be curious to watch how Deal does and see when see when Shaw is kind of is moved to questionable and taken off the injury report, and kind of how his progress progresses from here to the end of the month. Let's see. His next question is, does Jim Leonhard stick around? That's a good question. He's a little bit of an interesting situation. I think he's a little bit unique in the fact that, he's a Wisconsin alum. He loves it in Madison. But you could say that about a lot of coaches that end up leaving for greener pastures. But I think in his situation, just from talking to him a little bit more, I think, the way he kind of answers some of my questions, it seems like that, him being so young and being so far ahead of the game in the coaching profession at this point in his life, I don't think he's in a hurry to leave Wisconsin. I think he really likes it here, and I think he's even said, it's sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and he has to be kind of careful about if he were to take an opportunity, what it would look like when he actually got there, and he knows what he has here in Wisconsin, and he really enjoys it here, and his family enjoys it. So I think they have an opportunity to possibly keep him for a little while longer. Now, that could always change. The Wisconsin's defense, with replacing 7 starters, could come out and have another fantastic year, and he could just shoot to the top of the candidate list for a lot of teams, and he could have a job that maybe he can't really refuse. But I think as of right now, I don't think money is a huge issue for him. He's already made quite a bit in his playing career, and I don't think he's, obviously if an offer is big enough, he'll definitely consider it. But I think he's in a unique situation where he's made quite a bit of money from playing. He really loves it at Wisconsin, and he's young enough where he can stick around for a while and still accomplish what he wants to accomplish in the coaching profession. So, this could always change. Like I said, we could get to the end of the season and he could get an offer that's just too good to refuse, whether it's monetary or just a position that he can't really refuse. But I think based on his talent, I think Wisconsin has a better chance to keep him than maybe they would somebody else that's showed as much promise as him as a young coach. So that's going to be something interesting to watch. Obviously a couple teams already went after him last offseason and he stayed. So I don't necessarily think he's going to leave for a defensive coordinator job at the college level. I think he loves it enough at Wisconsin where, that I think even if it was, the biggest program in the country and it was a big money offer, I just don't know if he would take that to take the same position at a different college. So, we'll have to wait and see on him. It's going to be interesting to see how his career progresses and if Wisconsin's able to keep him around. And this is going to be a big test for him this season to kind of take a defense that, he came into this in a really good situation. Last season the defense was as good as you'll find in the country talent-wise, and he was able to coach them well, and they became one of the best defenses in the country for probably the third straight season, really, last season. So with having to replace 7 starters, it's going to be really interesting to see if he can elevate this defense and kind of get some of these young guys ready to really perform and kind of maintain that level that Wisconsin has set the last few years. Okay, we're going to end with Brian's last one. How far behind is Jack Coan? Will he see more than mop-up duty this season? I've actually seen a lot of progress from Jack Coan this offseason. I think last year when they went into the season, I don't think the coaching staff necessarily felt that great about having to put Cohen in if Hornibrook were to get injured. I think it would have been a little bit. I'm not sure if he was quite ready to take over the starting role if something were to happen to Hornibrook. This year, I think he's a little bit more ready. I think he's just been more consistent in practice, and it seems like he's throwing some nice deep balls. He is a little bit more accurate. He just seems a little bit more comfortable in the pocket, and like he knows a little bit more what he's doing out there. So I think that they feel a lot better about him this year than last year. That being said, I don't think he's near Hornibrook. I think Hornibrook is the clear starter and clear number 1 quarterback this season, and I don't think anything's really going to change in that regard. I think Hornibrook would have to play pretty poorly for an extended stretch for Cohen to get a look. But so I do think it's just going to be mop-up duty for Cohen unless Hornibrook gets injured. But you're only one hit away there from needing Jack Coan to lead this offense that's supposed to be one of the best, that they've had in a long time. So I think it's really important that Cohen has made that progress. And, I think Wisconsin hopes they don't really need to use him in a critical situation, but I think they feel better about it if they do. But again, Hornibrook is the number one guy. I don't think there's any debate about that, and I think he's going to have a good season. I think as long as if he cuts down his interceptions and takes care of the ball a little bit better, I think he's going to have a great season. And if you want to listen to our bold predictions podcast with John Veldhuis earlier this week that we released on Tuesday, one of my bold predictions was that Alex Hornibrook would make either first, second, or third team All Big Ten. So I think Hornibrook's in for a pretty good season here, and we'll see if he can cut down on those turnovers. But I think it would take a whole lot for Cohen to get some meaningful playing time this season. All right, that's it. I appreciate all the questions you guys sent in. Again, we're doing a live chat after the Western Kentucky game. It'll be really late after I finish up my work for the paper, but for you night owls, just check my Twitter account, and we will start at some point after the game on late on Friday night. Also, if you haven't yet, I usually forget to do this on the podcast, but if you could subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play if you haven't done so already, and maybe leave us a kind review or a kind rating if you enjoy the podcast. That would be great. That really helps. And keep visiting madison.com for all of your Badgers football coverage. Thanks for listening.